I had to sleep outside. I was freezing. Like, it freaked everybody out.
How did I never hear this story?
Well, it's not one I'm running around telling people about. Yeah.
Except today, ironically. Except today, you tell everyone?
Hey there. If you've joined the podcast today, my name is Chris Jarvis. I work with companies on employee giving and volunteering programs.
And my name's Jake McIsaac. I spend a lot of time thinking about public safety and restorative justice.
So we are having conversations here that we've been having for 20 years.
Yeah, the only difference now is we press record and share it with you.
Thanks for joining us. On today's episode, Jake reflects on leaving and moving on, and how are you supposed to feel about that?
And Chris tells us a story that I've never heard before about a campsite freakout.
Dude, it was more than a freakout. I've never been so terrified in my life.
I guess you're going to have to listen to get into it. We would do this in court where you'd have to say, spell your last name. And I would get nervous, and I have spelled McIsaac wrong. And then I'm like, oh, there goes my credibility. It's like the first question. It was the first question, and I got it wrong one time. And I'm like, well, someone's going free today. Anyway, which is probably right. It's a weird way to sound.
At that point, don't you want to just ring a bell and go, ding, I'm out. I quit. It's over.
Weird way to sabotage the system by admitting you're stupid. You would never rely on me as a witness, right? I have been thinking about something, though, thinking about old weird instances. I recently drove by a spot just to set it up. This spot would have been sort of back in our the days we were working around Sunday suppers, and we were doing lots of stuff that we've talked about here, like all of that energy of wanting to change the world and give back. There was I won't say what it is, but there was a site that was really, really significant for us in that moment. And we were working out of there, and we were doing lots of cool work. And it always I thought it would always hold a special place. I don't go there anymore. I don't even go to the Sunday suppers anymore. But driving by last week, this particular site, I looked, and the streetscape of this particular area had changed and been gentrified, and it was very weird. And I thought, oh, is that the place? No. Oh, shoot, that place is gone. So it was this reckoning of that place isn't there. And then I was about 2 blocks away, and I went, oh, well. I kept driving. I thought it would feel different.
The place is gone, and so is its importance in your mind.
Well, right. And that's what I've been thinking about. Like, how could something that I was so connected to, that defined me, who I was, for probably a 5-year period in my life, this was one of the most important places. Dreaming about this place, working with this place, grieving the leaving of this place. Like, there was a whole lot of energy around the spot. And then I just drove by and was like massively indifferent. Mm-hmm. So unpack that for me, will you? Since we've unpacked many of your stories. Help me.
We do. It's nice. It's nice when you bring something to the table of substance that we can kind of autopsy together.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tell me if this is similar just so I see if I'm on the same page, because I feel like I've had this feeling before. And I feel like I have it for projects, places, and people, basically. And usually the people in the project or the people in the place overlap to some degree or another. But sometimes there's just sort of nostalgia about, when I was young, we had the privilege of having access to a house in New Brunswick that was known as the Victoria Manor. It's the only house I've been to that has a name. And it's in Albert County, which is an area that not many people in the world ever get to go to, and not many more would even know about it, on the Bay of Fundy. And it was this old Victorian house that was built for the first Lieutenant Governor of New Brunswick. So New Brunswick was formed out of Nova Scotia. The first Lieutenant Governor in the late 1800s built his house. He built a really nice house across the street, which he lived in for the year or whatever while this one was being built. And then he built there 22 rooms, 7 fireplaces, the whole thing. And then later in life, through a mishap of financial buffoonery, it got moved to another family to enjoy, which is wonderful. And I'm very happy for them. All of this to say that I think about that place, and it does have meaning in my mind. And I kind of miss it. And I miss it along with the people I miss there. But the project that I was going to explain before I went into this long explanation about a place, Impact 2030 was a project we launched with the United Nations to promote employee giving and volunteering. Actually, it was mostly employee volunteering towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And I began talking about this in earnest in 2011, 2013, really began working on it. 2015, launched it with a key number of other individuals. And then we had our first event in 2016. It was like a big deal because this hadn't been done before like this. United Nations has the volunteers, UN volunteers, but it's a kind of a different emphasis. So that kind of wrapped up all of a sudden during 2020 in the pandemic, when companies had to shift their funding to the communities that were being affected, rightly so, by the pandemic. And then after that, it was George Floyd. And then after, it was just a series of continuing things that happened. Obviously, we're aware of those things, but it just meant that Impact 2030 wrapped up the phase that it was in. We're moving to another phase. But Jake, all of this to say that I feel bad. I just feel bad. It was completely out of my control, but I feel like did I quit? Did I try hard enough? Should I have tried harder? Were there things I could have done? So it's a little different than your story, which is, I haven't thought about it. And when I think about it, I don't miss it. But do you ever find yourself wondering, should you miss it? And then if you do miss it, should you miss it? If you know what I mean, like me in my situation, or should you feel bad or responsible about it?
Well, what's interesting about your story is I think about when I left this other place. I mean, I couldn't imagine. It was like leaving. It was like the end of a relationship, not because something happened or someone did anything wrong or that I thought I would. You just knew it had run its course and it was over. And I think what I said earlier, I think that was actually the right word. Now that I'm thinking about it, like, I think there was a bit of a grief period. Like, I'm really going to miss this.
Yeah.
Like, it's redefining my place in the world because I can't imagine my life without that. Like right
and
now,
yet there were
I'm
no indicators to convince you that it was time to move on. Like you were sure about that. That wasn't being forced upon you. This was your choice to move on. And yet, okay.
Oh, no, it was very different. It was unlike the story that we told a few episodes back when you held all the power and decided to get me fired. That was a very different leaving the space. But this one was on
that episode got made, and I don't think I signed off on that one.
Yeah, no, probably not. But I think that there are times when we just know it's time to go. We know it in a range of ways. We know when the job has run its course and we stay there too long. We know the relationships that we have run its course, we stay or we grieve. It's like, or maybe we're staying in it and we should leave. Like, there's a whole bunch of those kind of factors. I think it was more like that leaving this place. I probably could have stayed.
Yeah.
And it would have been fine, functionally fine. I could have continued to do the work, probably with similar outputs, but it wasn't feeding my soul anymore. It wasn't really connecting with who I wanted to be and shaping me. So it was a really painful decision to say, I need to go. And I don't know what the next steps are, but I need to go. I do know that part.
Right.
But I'm shocked because in that painful leaving, I didn't anticipate that I would look back and go, oh, that was the big reveal for me.
You know what you sound like? Somebody who was in love. I will not be able to live without them. And then, 2 years later, sorry, what was that name again? Oh yeah. And you remember the person and then you realize, I don't miss them. And but that wasn't even conceivably true.
Right.
When it happened. Yeah.
It was this realization that I was like, that must have been significant for me. I know it was. But in leaving that, then there's this dissonance for me. when I was there, I formed really strong relationships with the folks that I served. That we were working together, and I would have talked about that as being my community, and I would have talked about those as real and genuine friendships and people I care about. And then those were gone too. And now I'm thinking back about, man, what? Because when we talk about this, whether it's transformative volunteering or asking people to facilitate restorative processes with their whole selves, like bring your heart to it, make genuine human connections. And then you say, but it might be time bound too. Like it might be time to move on. I don't know that I've given a lot of thought to the leaving portion of that.
Okay, so this is really interesting to me for a couple of different reasons. But one, you're right. When we invite companies to create programs to get involved in the community, and those employees kind of begin this journey from extrinsically motivated because it's kind of a fun thing to do and we're all doing it, to, okay, like meaningful discovery here, I'm getting something out of it, and they want to come back, and they form these attachments and relationships. Well, eventually one of two things happen. One, they leave the company, and then do they leave that community? What if they have to relocate? They just, like you said, like being traded from one team to another overnight. These were your friends, you were working towards goals, and now you're on another team and you want to destroy them. I mean, that's a very interesting dislocation, I think, for humans to experience. But we have not yet provided, although it is something that I would love to explore through the Institute, we haven't developed or kind of dug into how do you help people leading these events or creating connections with the community to understand that the nature of that relationship is not permanent, even though the new perspective you're taking is. So your perspective on this community and these individuals, friends or foe, in or out, am I complicit in their issues? Do we co-create things together? What's their experience like? This proximity, this affinity that develops, there's a perspective that allows that to happen that should continue on, but it may require or find itself in another context for the next stage of that journey. And it doesn't mean, and it's funny because I'm doing some self-analysis here, which is always good to do, because we don't know what we think about something till we say something about it. And I think the perspective lives on, and the role those people played in shaping that perspective persists. But the relationship and the physical proximity to the person may not, for a whole bunch of reasons. And that's okay, because we take them with us in our own personal journey, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of where I am 5 minutes into this conversation, I guess.
Well, you talked about proximity and those connections. And I'm thinking about, we've probably talked a lot about this. Maybe it was in season 1 or something, but that chemical, that oxytocin, that is that when there's genuine bonding. That bonding with another human, and what's happening in your brain actually in those moments when it sounds like we're asking people to take an approach, just be human, make a connection with someone, get close, see them for who they are. And there's some pain, I think, into leaving if that chemical reaction has happened. I think that's one of the ways that's going to make it harder, is because it wasn't just a shared experience. Like, wasn't that a neat thing we both did together? But actually, I was changed by it. Physiologically, my brain shifted. The chemicals, when we made that connection, something happened to me that has made this a defining moment.
Yep.
I do think it makes it really, really hard to leave those really pure interactions. Not pure in terms of motive, but pure in terms of connection.
Yeah. And I'm going to suggest, based on some work that I've been doing this week, there could be 2 reasons for it. And the reason I'm suggesting that, Jake, is I really want your take on it from the restorative angle. Okay. So there's a series of videos on the brain that I've been eating up in anticipation of some work that's coming up, presentations and whatnot, and some things that we're developing for Social Rev Live. And they have to do with the brain and how the brain works. And the part, and I'll put the links in the show notes, but the part that was interesting was that the brain is a predicting organ, meaning it takes all of our experiences, 100 billion neurons when you're born. We lose 20 billion of them, I think, by the age we're 3, because it's honing down who you could be into who you're becoming based on environmental stimuli, your parents, language, environment, color, famine, access to food, what kind of food, all of this kind of thing. And then you continue to grow, and your brain continues to develop it, and it won't get any new mass. It has to keep reusing its mass, and it pretty much gets its fixed state around the age of 30 for, say, males. For women, it's younger. What we tend to do in a situation is, since system 1 is the automated system, controlling the gestures I'm making, my facial expressions, my heartbeat, everything, like all of this decisions. I think I've said this before. How many times do you think about food in the day, Jake? 40 times, 80, 100, maybe?
Sure.
Take a guess. Just so listeners know that
25.
you've not hung up. And not
25 times a day I think about
it's
food.
702. 702.
Oh, thanks for making me wrong. That's helpful.
Cornell University, yeah, on there. But it's because your system 1 is noticing, registering, reacting, noticing, registering, reacting. And your system 2, 5%, that's your rational brain. That's the part that you that makes you aware that you're alive, that part of your brain. In your cortex, your prefrontal cortex primarily.
So those of us who are overthinkers would have a very active prefrontal cortex.
Yeah. Okay. So
right?
Overthinking, and you can't do it right. That's when you sit, because you've learned it in the automated system that it kind of can just, and if you zone out and you go Zen and you let your system 1 take over, you're in what they call the state of flow. And this is where you start, Babe Ruthing home runs over like he had a bad batting average, but you know what I mean? Like You get in the flow and you're just like in the zone. That's exactly right. So that's system 1. And our brain uses all of our past explicit knowledge and implicit knowledge, our genes and everything. It runs a scenario in every single moment. It's always thinking, what's the next right thing to do? Do I continue talking? Do I leave the room? Do I look away? And we are more or less a compilation of these predictable reactions. That's 95% of our personality is completely predictable. Once you sort of see the stories that this person is telling themselves and how these things arrange themselves. Okay. I'm not smart enough to do any of that. So all of this to say is, when you're in that moment and you are leaving that project, that place, that person, and you think about the future, and you think about being in a situation where that person, place, or project will not be a part of your life, you trigger your amygdala. You're like, panic, because you've never experienced doing it without them. You've never experienced that emotion without them. You've never experienced this contact. There's so many variations, and all of a sudden there's this deep gap, and that sense of missing is very unfamiliar. And my friend Jake McIsaac always says, unfamiliar feels
unsafe. Yes. And that's interesting to me, because if it's fight, flight, or freeze, or whatever those hardwired responses to an active amygdala, freezing in this context feels just like staying. Right. I can't do anything else. Like, I guess I'll just stay here.
Oh my gosh. That is a great insight. Yeah. I've never thought of that.
So I wonder if I have this sort of,
could be a trauma response.
Could be. Well, I definitely, it definitely is in certain contexts, in particular, the work that I've done around sexualized violence and with survivors of that. But those experiences, because we don't automatically do what other people expect in a certain set of circumstances. Why didn't you just fight? Why didn't you just leave? So dissociating and just freezing and staying, there's a range of things that are happening for people, and we know all about that. But in this context, I wonder if it is like, when I have this moment of decision, if it is what you're saying is, do I leave? What keeps me then? Is it my freeze state? I've now thought about all of these other terrible things, and I just have to put them out of my mind because I cannot process the impact of all of those things or even the steps required to address all of those things. So I just have to put them away and go with this constant that I do know. Is that kind of where you're talking about the freeze?
I think that's an interesting, like for me, moving on is kind of, I've given it a morality, a negative morality. Like I convinced them that this really mattered. They bought into it. We did a project together. The project ended and I moved on. And I'm a bad person for abandoning them.
Right.
But that's a weird meaning to bring to it. First of all, it's a meaning that's compounded over the years through a whole bunch of source material that I may not even be aware of, for one thing.
Quitting is bad. So we tell people quitting is bad. Exactly. So that's sort of that is one rule. One rule that sits in the back. You fight for it. You keep, whether it's but quitting is bad. Quitters don't get far in life. Like those are those narratives that those are early lessons that get more and more complex. But the root of it is quitting is bad. Therefore, the person who quits is a quitter and a quitter is bad.
That's right.
Don't be a quitter.
And I think I'm thinking I think that I'm thinking that. I'm not thinking that. I'm getting.
Let's quit our jobs. Let's do it. Let's do it right now. 1, 2, 3.
Edit this out. Okay, I'm getting a script from my system 1 that says, based on everything we know, quitting is bad. And then my system 2 goes, yeah, I'm going to have to stay because it's the right thing to do. And I'll rationalize the heck out of it without having any agency over the reason I'm doing it in the first place, other than it's all I know.
Right.
And that doesn't make it the right decision.
Right.
So the first thing I need to do is do this, become internally aware of how of why I'm thinking the way I'm thinking, then sort of take an emancipatory knowledge or learning position outside of it and say, do I agree with this rubric? Because I may not have put it together. It may have been given to me of quitting is bad. Mm-hmm. And then step back in and sort of be a little bit more realistic about nobody expected to do this for the rest of their life, Chris. You don't keep people, you keep perspective. You let them inform your life. There's a reciprocity in peer learning that can be transformative. Did you pursue that? Then that was the joy of the relationship. And you do take that with you. Those are very unfamiliar thoughts, Jake. Those are system 2 thoughts that are not imprinted yet. They're not automatic. And unless I continually go over it, if I find somebody who's willing to do a podcast to talk to me about this stuff, which is the whole point of this podcast, is to talk about it enough between the moments so that it does become automated, I become consciously competent.
Well, I think that system 2 work is interesting because I think the other law of the universe, it's hanging out there or something, is that all pain is bad. So that if it's a painful decision to leave, then it must be the wrong decision.
Yeah.
And what we've talked about lots here is that growth is painful.
Yeah.
And so, the thing that might keep us going to that system 1 is the natural avoidance of pain. The natural avoidance. So we'll freeze, we'll stay because this is painful. Pain must be wrong. Quitting must be bad. So don't do it. And I don't know, this is taking a weird turn, but it was all about driving by that place was really about not missing it and no longer feeling the pain or being confused.
Exactly.
Was the realization for me, was that the right decision? And I believed something at the time that was no longer true the other day, which was it didn't hurt forever. And I think it was right. I can think back now through my experiences and say, look at all of the things that have happened since. Okay. But I didn't know that at the decision point where I had to make it.
In the moment when you're reacting and you get all these reactions because you're playing out the past algorithms and you come up with a decision and you rationalize it and you made the choice, you didn't know any of this, but now you're past it and you can look back, and the new automatic thing that you can push down by thinking about it over and over and over, and that is leaving is not the same as abandonment. Quitting or stopping something does not impugn my moral character. There is more going on. I cannot take a basic understanding of hot stove, hurt bad, which is very useful, and apply it to relationships with other people. Bad feeling, bad, avoid, don't do, keep person, freeze, right? Like that's where it goes to. We sort of interpret these things and shape our brain to respond to our environment this way. But now when we have the moments of insight like you're having, and we just think about it over and over, we can really hardwire, literally put a myelin sheath over these new neural pathways. Because I would say you had a disorienting dilemma moment.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I expected that I would always feel and think of that space in a certain way. And when I drove by, it certainly was not that. And I was like, that's different. But I think the flight moment, going back to your active amygdala piece, is that I have to probably construct a narrative that that place is bad too, and that to stay would be a threat or a harm. So I have to get out. I've rationalized it somehow that those are now bad. And for me to be safe and good and whole and well, I have to leave. And I think sometimes that's true. So I don't want to discount that in a range of circumstances that is true. But it doesn't have to be the only reason that people leave. And when we create that narrative, especially when it's not true, it's unhelpful overall, but it's helpful for me to leave. It's helpful for me to find the energy to say, if I can create this space as being
you need a story.
I need a story. I need the story. I need this to be the locus of bad, that I can leave this place, this relationship, this person, this job,
or it could be a
experience.
fixation on a better thing somewhere else. It doesn't. Yeah, exactly.
But the other thing that I've now become, thinking back at that place and my leaving, I've started to look back on those things that I thought about that place when I was leaving too, that may not have been charitable, that may not have been fair, and may not have been true. And most importantly, were not true. It didn't mean that what they were doing didn't matter anymore. It didn't mean that I had outgrown. It didn't mean that I knew something different. This was a different journey for me. And I'm hoping that everything of the good that I got in that journey, or in that time there, that the investment of that part of my life there, that other people were able to get to.
I think so.
I hope so, because that place probably was pretty much the same.
Yep.
I was the one changing.
Yep.
Right.
And so, then, and again, if we can just understand that much of our initial reaction is just a predictability that our brain can't help but run because of how Homo sapiens are created. That's a good example.
There it
Dropping
is. That came
the
through.
word created.
Oh, it came through for you.
It's an old word. Yeah, just threw it in. I don't want to say that. I could rationalize it now. The reason I use created is because blah, blah, blah. That's exactly how it works. So there was I'll give you an example, and maybe for sake of time, we might have to be done with this one, but my shoulder has been bothering me. It's an old injury, a rotator cuff type of thing. So I went to the doctor, got an x-ray, then they were going to give me an MRI. So I drove up. Luckily they had it for the next morning, took it, drove up there, got there. Now I'd had an MRI before when I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. It was not an enjoyable experience. Long tube. There was a mirror there. They talked to me. They kept saying, stop moving. It was an fMRI because they were trying to watch my brain work.
Stop moving is supposed
stop
to be
moving.
Wildest thing you can say to someone with a tick.
And that's what I told them. And they didn't laugh.
Sorry. I shouldn't laugh. But I just, the absurdity of it.
You do not know what Tourette's is, do you? But the reason I was moving wasn't just the Tourette's. It was the Tourette's was reacting to my severe claustrophobia, which I had forgotten about. And just for listeners, when I was in my mid-20s, just to give you a sense of scale here, it's bothered me my whole life, but I'm usually not in situations where it occurs. And that is because I avoid situations where it occurs, not consciously, but system one is like, never, ever let that happen again. So
right.
Okay. When I was a kid, you don't go to bed in an inner room with no lights. I know all of these things. You just learn and you prevent it. So we go camping. I have not been camping with a whole bunch of people, and I've not camped outside overnight in a tent in Muskoka, like this big park in Ontario. So my brain couldn't predict what was coming. And instead I go to sleep, and the next thing I know, I hear someone screaming, just screaming. And I'm wondering why my hands and knees are wet and there's dirt all over them. And I'm panting, and I come to, and I'm crawling through the forest, screaming at the top of my lungs.
No.
I'm having a claustrophobic reaction.
No.
I have never experienced terror like that before in my life. I would have needed to be hospitalized. I just had to sleep outside. I was freezing. The next night they built a kind of a thing by the fire for me. Like, it freaked everybody out.
How did I never hear this story?
Well, it's not one I'm running around telling people about. Yeah.
Except today. Ironically. Except today you tell
my past
everyone?
Experiences are not who I am. I'm not a composite of all the things I've experienced. Okay, I keep telling myself this. Okay, so
wow.
So everybody knows it's there. And in system 1, for whatever reason, we can talk epigenetics, we can talk about being passed down, we can talk about a DNA problem, we can talk about a brain triggering the amygdala with a lack of sort of sensory stimulation of the eyelids, even when the eyes are closed, whatever you want to talk about. But I am built to react that way. Now, at the time, I thought I was broken, but I'm built to react that way. It's just the way I am. But I forgot. And in this MRI, when I went in, I thought, I'm 55. It's a long time ago. I'll be fine. I can think my way through this. Even though I know that you cannot use system 2 to override system 1. You cannot. Even people who have the discipline to think their way through things have disciplined themselves previously to control the elephant that they are riding, right? So I go in there. I've done no work. I've just avoided the possibility of having the experience. And about 3 minutes in, I started. I'm okay. I'm breathing. I'm sort of shocked by how fast it happens, and then the terror overtakes me, and my system 2. This is a rational part. It's like, it's okay. Look up there. Don't move. Just move a little. You can get out. And then system 1 starts just, you're going to have to get out of here. You're going to bust the machine. It's going to cost billions of dollars. You're going to break something. You're just going to start screaming. And I couldn't get control back. It had absolute control. Amygdala's firing up. I am flight. So what she heard was, yeah, excuse me. Can I get out for a minute? Well, sir, we're not done. It's another 15 minutes. I'm like, yeah, I just need to get out right now, if you don't mind. Okay, sir, I'll be right in. Yeah, the sooner the better, I think, for all of us. Yeah, so and I sit up. I'm like, okay, can I go back in? Well, we would need to start over. Yeah, you know what? Arm's fine. I'm out of here. There's no way, even if I can't move my arm for the rest of my life, I cannot do that unless I do the in-between work. And I don't know how to get rid of claustrophobia, but I'm trying to read about it because I don't know what to do.
That's wild. I think I knew that you didn't like confined spaces from the earlier. I did not know those 2 stories. So that's fascinating. So you're lucky in some ways to know that about yourself on this second story. I think that's really cool that you have that insight now that you wouldn't have had going camping.
Oh, yes. I would have never, it would have happened. And I would have thought, the terror would have been even more, like I would have just crawled right through. I'm sure destroyed the thing.
Did you? Yeah. Did you? Millions. Be an epic story. By the way, that would be an epic story also. So I'm not against that story, although I would be sad in the moment that it caused you so much pain. For the pod, for the listeners, I think. Anyway, but that is something that is fascinating to me, that you, in that moment, you had done some work. It wasn't that you'd done enough to overcome the elephant, as you say. Yeah. But there was some insights that you said, this could go badly. So there was some control early on.
Yeah.
Which gives hope,
I
hope
did
to
have
the investment.
What's that?
It gives hope to that if you do make the investment, that some things stick.
Yes, because I learn things all the time. I
Right.
take in new information. I learn how to work with new machines all the time. And there's this practice to make perfect, but practice to automate is really what we're doing. And I think the same thing is true for those kind of situations, but also when we have a that was a disorienting dilemma for me because I didn't expect that to happen.
Right.
So what does that mean? And you had a disorienting dilemma. And so between those disorienting dilemmas, that's where we have we think it through and we do the rational discourse like we're doing right now, and we're
Right.
assigning meaning to it. So there's this, I just learned this. So the reticular core, that's the part that during the experience tells you how much and how many, like you're hearing a sound. Is it a loud sound? Is it repeating a lot? And it tells you your prefrontal cortex, your cortex, should you pay attention to this and keep it? But what we're doing right now is kind of like that. We're rehearsing the story, we're assigning the meaning, and we're forming these fibers that if there's enough emotional connection to it, and we talk about it enough, maybe the next time we're faced with having to leave a person, a place, or a project, we don't run the same algorithm. We're kind of like, it's okay. I understand that it's run its course, and I'll be okay. I mean, that would be such an amazing way to live. I can't, not that I'm going to abandon everybody. That I think that's what I sound like.
But I wonder if there are those half steps. So there's that rational piece, that system 2 thing, the stuff you're thinking about.
Yes.
Right. So
yes,
but it's not just rational. Sometimes we need new experiences. We need to build that repository that's in the hippocampus to be triggered by the amygdala that says to your prefrontal cortex, reach over here, pull experiences that will make sense of this quickly. And if we don't, then we're back to the amygdala.
Yeah, we're going to go with what we know.
We're going to go with what we know.
How we know. Yeah. Yeah.
So there is some value to building that suitcase of experiences too, though, so that when you need it, you can say, I've been here before.
Yep.
Or I've been in something similar. What are the things that are same? What's the sameness in this situation that I could pull over? It may not be exactly the same. So maybe there are things that it'd be fascinating. I wonder what those things have been along the way that gave you the confidence to even get in it in the first place. Like you knew something about that space and you probably thought you had it licked going in.
That was the expectation.
Right? That it was, I've done enough rationalizing and maybe there are similar. You told a story a couple episodes ago about being and this now makes more sense to me, much more sense. You talked about your trip to Birmingham, Alabama, and you were in that jail cell, or you were in a space, and it was very confined, and you felt overwhelmed. And I didn't pick up on that story until now, when you were like, it conjured up a whole bunch of, oh my gosh, I don't know if I could do this.
Yeah,
and I think maybe we had to edit this part out, maybe. But in that moment, you contemplated that it would be better to die than to stay in those circumstances.
Yeah, 100%. Because of the feeling that I know I feel in those moments.
Right.
And I it's interesting that you're bringing it back.
Well, it's a callback to a previous episode because we need people to listen, share, and subscribe.
Yeah, but also that weirdly now, if I went back to that museum after reflecting on my own experience in the MRI, it would be even harder.
Right.
Because I've just had it again. I'm very aware of it. And just so this back and forth, but I need to introduce this new thing, this new piece that it's not happening to me. And I it's really hard to figure out how to grow your brain to do it, to do life the way you want to. That's it's fascinating to me how much control we actually have over that organ. And how little attention I pay to it, I guess, is what's really interesting to me.
Well, we use it often and think of it rarely. So it's right. So who knows? Maybe there's a new business line, like the brain, the gym for your brain. We could get people to do those kind of exercises. And what would you do to strengthen? I don't know. Maybe
Yeah. Strength
Maybe we
training for
just
your brain.
quit everything and do that. I don't know. But listen, this actually has been really helpful.
I'm scared to quit. I don't know what's going to happen.
It has been helpful to think through. You have to say that. It. I certainly don't. Well, our personalities are very much like that, though, right? Like I leave.
Your set of experiences that you're running a prediction model on are wildly different than mine. So it's of course our responses, and yet our value systems
very similar.
Very so it ends up looking like two expressions of the same set of values, but very different behaviors.
I am faster to say, okay, take the loss, move on, or nope, don't like it, leave. I think you're more likely to stay.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm wrestling with is that doesn't make either one of us wrong.
Right.
Right. It is a product of our experiences and our processing. Yeah. And it means nothing about the people or the places or the third P for alliteration that you had. Projects that we leave behind. It says nothing about them. Right. So I don't want my leaving to signal a bad person, a bad project, or a place that has no value.
Yeah.
Because all of those have their own, are worth their own contemplation about their worth and value and contributions to the world, with or without me.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to be leaving thinking about. It's been helpful.
Me too. That's a good way to say that. I appreciate that.
All right.
Thanks, Jake.
We'll talk soon.